I would say the leading one was the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which a lot of people sit there and say, oh, well, that must have really hurt Ukrainian fertilizer exports. And that's not the case because Ukraine is not a major exporter of fertilizer. What happened, it was a secondary event. Russia, upset with Europe, but first on the Nord Stream pipeline situation, and of course their support of Ukraine, stopped shipping natural gas to Europe. European Dutch TTF values started to skyrocket. All of a sudden then we had, the price of the input was so high, they could not make nitrogen fertilizer and it disrupted global supplies. That to me is the single biggest event just because it wasn't a direct fertilizer situation. It was one of those secondary events that had a major impact on the fertilizer markets.
So now, Josh, we sit here and look at the market and say, okay, we still have Russia trying to invade Ukraine, still there. That issue hasn't gone away. China's having, whether it's an up or down economy, you pick what service you want to believe. And we've seen a relaxation in most of the fertilizer prices. Why?
We have normalized a lot of the situations. To your point, the Russian stoppage of natural gas flows to Europe. At first, that was a major event. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? We're going into winter. There's not enough supplies. We saw that Dutch TTF go from $4, $5, $6 in MMBTU to 103. Today, 15, 16 bucks. Are we back to absolute normal? Absolutely not, because the world is still messed up. But we're not back at that high end because we figured out normal. We figured out imports and exports and things like that. An open and free market finds a way. Eventually, there's always going to be a little bit of a scary period there where all of a sudden everybody's like, oh my gosh, I don't know what's going to happen. And fear generally drives prices higher. But as we start to figure it out, and that's what's happened around the world, we figured out, oh my gosh, we thought we were losing Russia. We didn't lose Russia. Oh my gosh, Europe will never turn their nitrogen production back on. About 75, 85% of their production is now online. So all these events that we're scared of, we figured out.
But did we also use less product?
To a certain extent, yes. High prices cure high prices. Demand always ends up having to say in the S&D, right? So yeah, there's a little bit of a scaling back, but ultimately, this seems as though it was more of a rationale of the new world, to me at least.
So what's going to be the big driver now then on the volatility?
Well, right now, it depends on the market. When we look at nitrogen, a lot of it is centering around China again. The government continues to sit there and step into the export market, making dictations. You can do this. You can't do this. Right now, the big fear of the world is the government came out and said, we need to fill Chinese warehouses first. We are going to stop exports. Well, then we started to find out it wasn't exports to the rest of the world. It was exports to India. They're really zeroing in and saying, we're going to slow down going to India. So that's disrupting global supplies, global trade. On the phosphate, it is dodging two bullets. That major hurricane that went up through the Gulf of Mexico and went just north of Tampa, that thing missed a lot of phosphate production by a hair. And then the earthquake in Morocco, right? A huge devastating effect on the population. Fortunately, the phosphate production kept on churning along. So it's missed two major bullets, but still dealing with very, very tight supplies here in the U.S. Countervailing duties are keeping three of the world's largest global exporters from accessing our country.
We're already looking ahead. I'm already getting questions about 24 acres. You're making a decision to plant corn or beans now if you're applying anhydrous. So you're anticipating more fall application, henceforth, more corn acres, right? Or am I reading too far down into the book?
We are forecasting right now in our demand models, we are using 92 million acres of corn and 88 million acres of beans next year. Now, that is actually a little bit less corn acres than what we did this year. However, last year, anhydrous is a little bit overvalued, and we didn't quite know there was going to be 94 billion acres, right? We didn't lead into the season thinking it was going to be that much. But as we look at it, we actually think that anhydrous is going to take more of the overall nitrogen demand, assuming Mother Nature allows it to get out there, because it has been so well priced. Right now, we're forecasting that fall anhydrous is going to be great. It's going to be 2.15 million tons applied. Well, what happens if it's November 1st and it finally starts raining? That's great for the Mississippi River. That's terrible for anhydrous application. Then what else falls in snap freeze? And we can't run toolbars anymore.
I guess I'll ask one more weather question. When you see areas come out of drought that traditionally are in drought, I'm thinking of areas south of you and west of you that have emerged. and then the areas around me that are in drought and don't look anywhere close to emerging. Does that have any influence on what you do?
Absolutely. And it's having the conversations with our clientele in those areas. It gets very difficult because put yourself, obviously, a lot of folks are listening in from a farmer's perspective. It's hot, it's dry. What's your approach to it? I'm not putting anything on this ground. I'm not going to plant anything. If there's no moisture, it's stupid. I'm not going to spend the money. So your feedback to the retailer, I'm not going to buy. I'm not going to buy. I'm not going to buy. What happens when the first rain comes through? Well, I need to buy. Retailers sitting there saying, you sat there and said you weren't going to need anything. Every farmer in the area was saying, you weren't going to need anything. I wasn't going to take that price risk. So now all of a sudden, demand goes from 0 to 100 mile an hour in a matter of a couple hours when a rainstorm comes through. So and all of a sudden you start trying to figure out those regions. You can have an overall market that's falling through the floor. But if that region is sitting there desperate for whatever it can get its hands on, that number can actually start to rise. And those are the little opportunities or the risks that we look for.
The full discussion will be part of the MTOM release on Tuesday.